Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and call the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission meeting to order. Barbara, will you please call the roll?
Stacy Bloss.
Here.
Dustin Allred.
Here.
Claire Johnson.
Here.
Todd Russ.
Here.
Andrew Stone.
Here.
Morgan White.
Here.
Tesfaye Wolde Levine. Scott Hess.
Here.
And I'm first.
There is a quorum present.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay, not hearing any. We do have on the agenda this evening a presentation on waste and recycling topics by Amanda Soskin, but I don't believe that she's here yet. So, oh, never mind. Okay, she is on her way in, so we will not strike that from the agenda tonight. Okay. In your meeting packets that were provided last week, you received minutes from the SAC meeting that took place on February 6th. Is there a motion to approve the January minutes?
I move to approve.
Okay. Moved by Todd. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, thank you, Claire. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes that were distributed? Okay, not hearing any. All in favor of approving the January minutes, say aye.
Aye.
February meeting, say aye. All right, well, it's the February one. We're good. Okay. We'll continue with public input this evening. At this time, a member of the public may make comments to the board if you wish. If you would like to address the commission, just be sure to fill out a comment card and leave it with staff so that way we can keep record of who you are. Would anybody like to address the board this evening? Okay. All right. Scott, will you give the staff report, please?
Good evening. Before I get started, I want to mention that Barb Steele with Urbana Public Works is providing staff support tonight with us. She's taking Kate Brickman's place. Kate has taken the position of executive assistant to the mayor and future CAO. So it's a great opportunity for her and very happy for her. And so Barb will be with us providing support for the foreseeable future. First, on the staff report, some updates on the Climate Action Plan. We continue to work with our selected vendor, SunPower, towards a 2-megawatt solar array at our closed landfill. We are now developing a lease option and the format for a permanent lease with SunPower. And they'll be moving forward with the regulatory approvals that they need to develop an array. So that continues. The rules for the incentives with the Future Energy Jobs Act are not finalized anyway, so we're still right on track, if not early. So those incentives should be approved and published maybe in a month or two. We're also continuing to work with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. They have published their request for proposal for a third round of the Solar Urbana-Champaign program. And I think we're still on track for solar power hours in April. Staff has completed a draft of the calendar year 2017 community greenhouse gas inventory. So that's not just city facilities, but everything in the community within the city's borders. And we'll talk more about that later in the evening. Some additional energy and climate activities. Staff has spoken with and met with a couple of student groups, the Business and Environmental Responsibilities. They're going to be working on some projects with the city and also the university using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and also the National Renewable Energy Lab's recently released Renewable Energy Integration and Optimization Tool, REOPT for short. That's a tool that helps quickly model the value of solar plus storage at a particular facility or location. We also met with a group called Act Green and discussed the topic of their choice, renewable energy credits in the renewable energy market. I also wanted to share with you that the Illinois EPA is taking public comment on how to utilize the state's share of the Volkswagen settlement money. That's open now. My understanding is they're going to be focusing, or intend thus far to focus on traditional pollution reduction, so some emphasis on air quality non-attainment areas. And so that's all published on their website. I haven't had a chance to do anything more than skim over that website. But if you're interested in giving some public comment on how that money is spent, the link is in the staff report. UCycle staff recently attended the University of Illinois Housing Fair. We go to that more or less every year and talk with students because we have so many students who live in Urbana private housing and thereby are using UCycle recycling services. And because they're students, there's constant turnover, so we have to continuously share our message about how we recycle in Urbana. Staff continues to collect internal data on waste and recycling for our facilities and operations, and I think we'll have a more detailed internal waste and recycling report for the Commission next month. You may have seen on TV and in the news that Mayor and Council have gone through their every 4-year goal-setting process, and they settled on 5 top-level goals to work on in the next 4 years. These would be things above and beyond the normal obligations of the city, and they're listed in the staff report. The next Sustainability Advisory Commission meeting would be April 3rd at 7 p.m. in the council chambers. We are anticipating having a Lincoln Square visioning exercise with the planning division here. And as we discussed last month, we are welcome to rearrange some tables and do a more of a tabletop workshop type exercise if that's desirable by the commission.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Scott?
Scott, what's the National Renewable Energy Labs REOPT? Is that the short?
Mm-hmm.
What will be the outcome of that project that you guys are working on?
So they're going to look at some particular facilities and model. And I said it was solar plus storage. I actually think it's renewable energy plus storage. I think you can look at other sources. So they'll pick a particular facility, perhaps Public Works building, perhaps a university building, and the tool will guide them through some inputs to model the benefit of solar alone and or solar plus battery backup. And so it'll give, production, and I think it'll give, I'm not sure it's going to give a 25-year cash flow, but it might give like a net present value or something like that. This is kind of like a light version that's publicly available. NREL internally has the heavy version that probably takes a little more expertise to use.
Is this similar to the exercise on the fire station?
It is the light version of what NREL used for the fire station.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Got
Yeah.
it.
I don't know if I mentioned in a previous meeting, but we had talked about, well, we had modeled that fire station for solar plus battery backup with NREL, and we're eyeing that for a future solar array at least, if not battery backup, or at least get a price for battery backup. And there is the water company owned the property next door and is selling that property. I believe it was the water company. And so that combined with some potential interest to relocate that fire station means that we may not own that property long term. And so now we may not consider that for, you know, a 25-year or 15-year power purchase agreement if we're not certain we're going to be there. So that one may be off the table, and that doesn't really leave a lot of roofs that are new enough to take solar arrays on city-owned properties. So we're going to have to get a little creative.
So maybe going into the weeds a little bit here, but on the fire station analysis, it came out in the end of the analysis that, at least in economic terms, the storage didn't work. And so I don't know if there was a sensitivity analysis on, well, you know, what if this or that on the storage costs. So I don't know, do we have a sense of, you know, is there any reason that we would imagine in the near to medium term that would be economically viable?
One thing that was not modeled was how that cost benefit plays out if you have time of use pricing tariff.
Okay.
At the time, hourly pricing was not available from Ameren. It is, I believe it is now, because I think the meters are just, they're upgraded, and so that's available. So we could run that now, but I think it's a moot point now.
Okay.
But that means that whatever, you know,
You can
whatever
play
use,
games with storage and discharge. And
yeah. Now I don't know if the light version is going to be sophisticated enough to deal with that, but I think if you're able to get NREL's time, that their internal heavy tool can run that kind of analysis.
Okay.
And I think that would potentially make a big difference.
It'd be nice to see that. Thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions from the commission to Scott on the staff report? Would any members of the public like to ask any questions about the staff report so far? Yes. When you come up, just please state your name and be sure to write your name down on the piece of paper right there. Thanks, Amanda.
Might be my name the entire way down. Thank you very much. I have a quick question about the recycling. Would you? My name is Amanda Soskin, resident of Urbana. Quick question regarding the recycling. Would you call it internal audit? How would you characterize that?
So we have a number of data sources. The first is our level of service for waste and recycling at city facilities. So for instance, if this building, and I don't know what this level of service is, so I'm making this up. If this building is served by one 8 cubic yard dumpster that is picked up twice a week, that counts as 16 cubic yards every week, because there's no sensor that weighs it, no sensor that sees if it's half full. We just presume if we're paying for that level of service, that's the level of service we're using, and also if we're paying for more service than we need, then we need to audit that every once in a while and lower our service level, which we do whenever we have a new contract. So that's one data source. Another data source is the engineering section's construction projects. If they recycle asphalt millings, for instance, we capture that data. And then the same goes for Public Works Operations section. If they're collecting some material and reusing it, we capture that. If they're sending it to a metal recycler, we capture that. And so that's the main bulk of what we're totaling for internal waste and recycling performance.
So would you call that a waste characterization study, or does it not go to that extent? I mean, do you look in the dumpster?
No, we did have a waste characterization done years ago by the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center when they were offering that service at no cost. And so they came out with a trailer and pulled one day, well, I guess it'd be a 3 or 4 day period of garbage from this facility, and sorted through it piece by piece and characterized everything in there. And we have that report on file.
And do you have comparable data over a period of time? I mean, I realize that's 1 day and a point in time. Did they do it ahead of that time? It was only a one-time occurrence.
Yeah, our intention was to have them do the waste characterization. Obviously, they provide a report and give you recommendations like, there's a lot of copy paper in here, and that's obviously recyclable. And so we did some communications based on their report to staff. And then the intention was to come back a year later, do another characterization, see if anything changed. And within that time period, they were not able to continue offering that service at the ISTC.
Just to be clear, they do offer it for a fee.
For a fee.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, one more. Lincoln Square. In terms of your mention in this context, is that to get input from a sustainability purview, or just another avenue for community engagement?
The latter. Although, given the nature of the members of the commission, certainly it will have a sustainability interest, I would imagine. But the planning division is crafting a number of public engagement exercises that they're going to share with community groups all over the city for several months, and compile that into kind of a revisioning of the entire Lincoln Square area. So it's not just the physical building, but including the surrounding areas, namely the parking lots that are owned by the city.
Okay, moving on to continuing business. Do we have an update on public engagement by either Todd or Andy?
So I'll start. Not a whole lot of updates. We did not meet in the past month, but I have a little bit to report, and I believe Andy has a little bit to report too. So I've started to have just some real preliminary conversations. So one of those relates to just kind of getting a start on looking at how we can address some of our climate action goals in the commercial sector. And so that's just one little start there, and I hope more to come along those lines. Another one is preliminary conversation in energy efficiency and climate action goals, particularly related to low and moderate income housing. And so that's an item that would connect with our climate action plan goals, but also the council goals. One of the council goals that is to invest in older housing stock. And so I hope to have more on that. And then Stacy and I both had a meeting with the Future Cities group. This is the student group at the middle school, and Scott Tess has engaged with them in the past. And so that's some planning for what is to come with the Future Cities group, in the coming school year. And I think that's all that I have for right now.
And I contacted the Regional Planning Commission about whether I know they have a guidance document on water, and I was wondering if they were planning on or have a guidance document on energy. And they do not have one, but if we had interest in having them do one, perhaps they might engage us in doing that. So we'd have to get back to them whether we're interested, and then they would take that to their management and planners to see if that's possible. But they seem to be, person I talked to seemed to be interested in the subject, so
Could you explain what you mean by a guidance document? Who's the audience and what kind of guide? And water, is that both potable water and stormwater, or?
Yeah, the water documents about, kind of builds on the other groups and around the region, their water plans, and it's just a guidance document for the citizens to say, okay, water use, surface water, groundwater, how to protect it, how to conserve it, how do you plant a rain garden. It was a lengthy document, but it kind of built on other groups' documents. So they actually wanted to have their own document that they could use regionally. So I was thinking a similar document would be useful for solar, wind, geothermal. How can people use those to heat and cool their homes, and then how does that fit into the reducing carbon footprint? So.
Would that just be, I'm just curious because I'm not familiar with the policy document or the guidance document on water, so I'm wondering about an energy document, if that would be primarily for residential use, or would there be sort of commercial or municipality guidance or interest in guidance on these issues from a county level? I know that I don't have much I don't have much experience working with RPC on planning or energy issues for that matter, so that it seems like a resource that would be available, but I'm not sure. I just don't know what exactly
So
you
if we were
are
to
envisioning so far.
propose it for a special project, they might take it on themselves. We'd have to discuss that with them, and they'd have to discuss it internally. But yeah, it's usually for a range of users. It's not based just on residential. So, and they have a larger footprint than just Champaign County. So.
And also, I just want to clarify that the issues addressed by an energy guidance document would be different than what we have as far as our city's goals are in a climate action plan related to energy.
I think they would be similar, and they would extend kind of what we're trying to do further afield. So I think they would use what we already are doing as a basis, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions for Andy or for Todd? Okay, well, thanks to you both for continuing to consider these issues and different opportunities. If I guess I do have one more question, sorry, on a request for RPC. If we were to make a request, it's more of a formality. Would we have to vote or have a motion here in order to say that the SAC is requesting something like this?
I think if you wanted to say that the SAC is requesting this, you should pass a motion. Certainly any individual can ask the RPC to do anything as well.
So perhaps this isn't far enough along yet to get to the point where we would ask for a motion, but it sounds like, depending on if there's some interest, that we could do so in a future meeting.
Yeah, I think I just posed the question, and then the planner I was talking to, she indicated they're having a meeting in April, that such a request could come up for discussion at their planning meeting. So if we were to propose it for, I'd have to find out when the meeting in April is. So
We probably want to ask where they would fit that in their work. So some of their work is with their existing funding sources, Some of it is prepaid hours from their member agencies, and then some of it would be an additional $1. So if the latter, one or the other of the latter two, that would be important for the city to know. If they're considering it for their already established funding sources, then that's a little bit different ask.
Yeah, it was, I think at this meeting, they will decide whether it can be just a special project that they take on themselves, thinking that Urbana is already contributing to the department or the group. So that's the decision they would make at this meeting, I guess.
Andy, it's unclear to me, are they already planning to discuss it there, or do they need to hear back from us first?
No, they need someone to request that be on their agenda.
Okay. So can I make a motion? I'd like to make a motion that we request that the RPC consider options for them providing an energy guidance document, like their water guidance document, for use by all of RPC's counties, not just Urbana.
Would there be a second to that motion?
Second it.
Okay. Any discussion or questions on the motion? All right. All in favor of requesting the RPC to consider creating a guidance document on energy, say aye.
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 All right, that passes. Are there any other issues to bring up under public engagement?
I still have a question.
Oh, yes.
Having made that motion, does that mean Scott's going to ask them? Or do we still need one of us to ask them on behalf of the council?
I had made the assumption that it would be Andy, since he
Oh.
has a contact there, but
That sounds
I
good.
don't mean
That's
to
better.
volunteer you to do that.
I don't know.
I
think,
don't mind asking them.
you know, the motion has been made and approved. I think anyone can inform them as such. So Andy and I can figure that out.
For Morgan?
We'll figure it out.
All right, having passed that, are there any special considerations that anybody would like to make sure that is included in any discussion with the RPC on this request? Okay, I trust that Andy and Scott will be able to figure that out and keep us informed. We look forward to hearing back. Okay, sorry, just one more time. Was there any other questions on public engagement? All right, under new business, we have a presentation this evening on waste and recycling topics from Amanda Soskin. I know, Amanda, you were really not intelligent, but you really know a lot about waste and recycling, and we thought that this evening you were going to present to us on the topic.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Hello, everybody again. Okay, I'm going to read because I'm not so intelligent. I haven't got all my facts lined up and I want to stay on point. Is that okay? Okay, Amanda Soskin, Urbana resident. Okay. Some of this you know, just bear with me. Okay, so according to the World Bank, 54% of the world's population live in urban areas, and cities account for 85% of global GDP generation. Cities are also aggregators of materials and nutrients and accounting for 75% of natural resource consumption, 50% of global waste production, and between 60 and 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. So large cities or small, simply put, cities are using more and more resources. We need to be able to provide cities with those raw materials, but we also have to prevent environmental degradation and resource scarcity. A city's materials use uses have become more sustainable. A city's materials uses have to become more sustainable, and therefore there must be a transition from a linear economy in which we source, produce, consume, and discard to a circular economy in which we design for circularity so that we may source, produce, consume, and cycle materials back into the economy. It is precisely because cities are large consumers of resources that they are key participants in the transition to a regenerative or circular economy. The principles of a circular economy. Principle number 1 is to design out waste and pollution. The circular city will reveal and design out the negative externalities of economic activity that cause damage to human health and natural systems. This includes release of toxic substances, greenhouse gas emissions, air, land and water pollution, and traffic congestion. Principle number 2 is to keep products, components, and materials at their highest value and in use. This means designing for reuse, remanufacturing, and recycling to keep components and materials circulating in and contributing to the economy. Principle number 3 is to regenerate natural systems, regenerate natural resources such as soil, and restore finite materials to be used again. A circular city embeds the principles of a circular economy across all of its functions, establishing a holistic urban system that is regenerative, accessible, and abundant by design. A circular city seeks to generate prosperity, increase livability, and improve resilience for the city and its citizens, while aiming to decouple the creation of value from the consumption of finite resources. A circular economy requires collaboration within and between all sectors of society, governments, the private sector, academia, non-government organizations, and the public. However, policymakers and local authorities must take the lead, and they can do so by leading by example, innovating with their departments and across services, and setting policy that moves the city towards circularity. So that's sort of the framework, and then I have some sort of thoughts in terms of the city of Urbana. So generally speaking, and as a sort of a premise and a protocol, is to put resource use and efficiency front and center. There are frameworks for this, and I won't go into it, and one is called Resolve, quote unquote. But essentially, so that's number 1. And number 2, the city of Urbana must create for itself a culture of sustainability and circularity. We are in it together. This is not the responsibility of the Office of Sustainability. It is every department, silo, team, individual, institution, and the citizens' responsibility to move the city forward. Within the city of Urbana, every decision, every penny spent, every event, every action is a bite at the apple. And here, for example, is where the Office of Sustainability can educate and work within departments to enable sustainability to comprise their everyday. Number 3, to build a culture of innovation around circular economy. The city can assist and prioritize circular economy projects by partnering, funding, finding premises or space, contracting with and helping to promote businesses that move the city towards resource efficiency. Number 4, to collaborate and build networks and coalitions. Number 5, data, open data. Get data and put it out there. Make information that the city has and that you yet to have transparent and available. Slice and dice the population into different demographics in a number of ways, and go out and get the data that will improve the lives of citizens. And number 6, apply technical solutions where able. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I did notice that you were reading from a document, and I'm not that familiar with circular economies. It's something that I sort of have heard about a little bit. So I guess I've got 2 questions. One is, would you be willing to share some of your notes with the city so that we can include that in the packet, so we don't have to just retype everything that you said?
Oh, yes, of course.
And then also, could you give just a little bit of background to the idea of circular economies and their applications, and maybe an example of where these practices are in use?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so circular economy as a sort of framework is the output of something called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's an organization out of the United Kingdom. And in terms of the framework is what I've essentially just stepped through. In terms of application, it's the idea of keeping resource use sort of in use, and that there is no waste, no pollution, no waste, and it kind of follows the principles that I've just stepped through. In terms of examples and things that you often see is, for example, a company that you might know is Philips Lighting. So Philips Lighting will lease essentially the lights to a city building or an organization or an institution, for example. The organization itself won't go out and buy the lighting, it'll lease it. So it's like leasing a car. You essentially purchase lighting. And so they will come in, Philips, they will maintain it, and they will give you the sort of highest and best technology and equipment. And when it's done and outdated, they will come and replace it. So essentially, the city or the institution is not paying out of pocket for equipment, it is paying for light. And so ultimately, those resources, if Philips has designed its model correctly, they will take them, reuse them, put them back into the system. Because it serves a purpose for Philips to put the best product out there in terms of removing planned obsolescence, to be able to have a longer duration for their product so that they don't have to go and replace it. Also, in terms of circularity and recycling, they want to be able to maintain their resources and put them back into use, because they know that virgin materials cost more than recycled materials. So if they can keep their material, tweak them, update them, and put them back into the system, they get another, I guess, bite at the apple in terms of reusing that equipment and not having to, I guess, purchase and replace and put in place new product. Another opportunity, for example, and might be a little closer to home, for example, is this idea of the food truck. The food truck, we all know well here in Champaign-Urbana, creates an extraordinary amount of waste because you have paper products and single-service plastic items. So there is a company, for example, out of Oregon that creates, that uses plasticware. It's plastic, and it's, I guess, PPA free. But the idea is the participating food truck will use the plasticware to provide as their sort of tableware for the person buying the product. The person will have to pay a deposit on the plasticware. So they are incentivized to return it. The food truck will have a repository to receive back the plasticware, and also participating food trucks or restaurants will also have a depository to receive back the plasticware. It's combined, it's sort of networked behind the system that the plasticware can be cleaned and put back into service. Therefore, food trucks create very little waste because they're using the plasticware, and a system is behind the restaurants and the food trucks to be able to wash it and put it back into service, therefore negating this issue of waste. And that's something that we could do. Not only could we put in place the plasticware, we could build an organization to be able to facilitate and maintain this and create the membership profile. That, again, employs people, employs students, and, again, takes waste out of the system. We could also have a printing or a production facility that took plastics from the system to be able to create this plasticware. We could create that business here locally. So the idea is to sort of decentralize, do away with waste, and create sort of new business opportunities, essentially sort of grows the pie, and again, takes waste out of the system.
Thank you for providing those two examples. Questions from the commission?
Thanks for the presentation. Oh, I was going to ask you a question, yeah. I didn't mean to say thank you and now go away. One of your comments was about projects, and you used one example with the food trucks. I wonder if you have other thoughts on waste streams or other subjects of possible or promising circular economy projects in Urbana, or particular waste streams, or other things that that we could imagine here.
Oh, yes. Well, in case, glad you asked. All right, number one, the plastic bag. So plastic bags are a means of convenience, for example. There isn't a need that plastic bag provides that cannot otherwise be met, for example, with a tote or some other bag. Plastic bags, for example, take an incredible amount of energy to produce, and they obviously do not degrade. They are also litter landscapes. You see them. They clog waterways. They exist in trees and in bushes, and they're generally a menace. For Urbana to really take a stand and show that sustainability and circularity is important, I would potentially suggest putting a fee on plastic bags. There are many examples across cities that have started to do this with excellent results in terms of bringing down the use of plastic bags. Now, there are those who might suggest, for example, that there are certain parts of the population, certain groups that need plastic bags, need that convenience. And I would suggest that is not necessarily true. If there are populations that, or certain groups that require bags or that convenience, there are other ways to meet that need, and that we need to think about those other ways to meet that need, and not suggest that, for one reason or another, a pharmacy or to make exceptions, essentially. So plastic bags, I think, is one. Number two, composting. This idea of food scraps. That's obviously something near and dear to my heart, but also circularity. So, for example, the city of Olympia in Washington is a similar size to Urbana, and they often do a waste characterization study once every 4 years. They'll go out and get a grant to do this on a citywide basis. So they'll pick different sort of institutions, possibly the municipality, possibly a commercial food producer or grocery sales, and different sort of types of institutions that essentially kind of sum to the whole, or they think kind of gets to the sense of, or the essence of waste, and are more representative of their city, and they will do a full-scale waste characterization. I believe they've done it, it's every 4 years, and I think they've done it 4 times, and so therefore they have points of comparison, which is quite important. And the reason why I mention this is because I believe, in terms of their waste characterization study, about 40% of their discards is food waste, food scraps. So obviously food scraps or food waste can be characterized in many different ways, and there's a sort of a pyramid that sort of suggests this, that at the very top of the food waste chain is food that could be diverted, is good food that could be diverted and put into the hands of the parties that need it. And so I know this is a conversation that's happening in the city and at the university, and there's a student group that is sort of working on that. And that app is very much still on a sort of a piece of paper and still in the beta phase, so it's not kind of close to being usable. So
what's that app called again?
Dibs.
Dibs. Yeah.
And so that app is great, but essentially I'll leave it there. That app is phenomenal, except it's not sustainable in the sense they don't have funding. So even if you put it out there, whether or not it stays out there and it becomes institutionalized is a question mark. And so there's an opportunity for us to support an organization like that. And whether the students continue on with it is a question mark. So, but it serves to kind of address that top line. Can we take good food and get it into the hands of the existing organizations that could use it? The second line is household composting. So a lot of households do compost in Urbana. I think the question mark is sort of how many, and could we do more? And there's an app, in terms of the use of technology, called Share Waste, that attempts to put households that do compost together with households that don't compost, so they can match each other and therefore sort of enable households that don't compost to be able to feed their compost into somebody else's household compost. And so essentially you're, again, taking a small bite out of the apple. It's not a silver bullet, but I don't believe there are any. And then you have this idea of community composting. So you sort of work your way down the chain. And so community composting could be a composting opportunity set up at Meadowbrook, because there's some infrastructure, or one of the neighborhood composting and the neighborhood gardens, where it essentially facilitates the compost, food scraps, for people in that locality. So again, a small solution in a neighborhood fashion could be done. There's no reason why the Park District Urbana couldn't necessarily support that. And then you sort of get into the bigger numbers. For example, commercial grade. LRC has 10% capacity, 10% of their volume, I believe, I have understood, can accept food scraps. So it has the capacity currently to accept food scraps, but I wouldn't say it exclusively doesn't. I would say that if you are a farmer or a food producer, for example, a market garden, and you happen to have excess pumpkins at the end of your fall season, you can take them to LRC. It's also considered put more land waste than it is food scraps. So the capacity is there. You could grow the capacity, but it would require EPA, additional EPA certification and probably some additional amendments to that facility, but the capacity is there. So today, LRC could accept food scraps, and an opportunity would be to prototype. Could it be the school district? Could it be the municipality? Could it be a handful of small businesses that start to we sort of create some sort of operational infrastructure to get their food waste to the LRC versus in the garbage? Because whoever you talk to now, whether it's whatever small business, without naming names, the food scraps go into the garbage. There just isn't another repository for them unless they have an agreement or an agreement with a farmer, for example, who is one reason or another willing to take their scraps because they've decided to be proactive and think sort of around the LRC and so, for example, Common Ground, I think, has an agreement with a local farm, which is wonderful, and more of that could happen. That's the collaboration. That's the network effect. Can you match people? So the other opportunity, and in terms of looking at circular economy in the municipality, is this idea of making sustainability part of the daily conversation. I mean, whatever the city does in terms of, again, that money spent or events, is an opportunity to address sustainability and circularity. So they should be zero waste. And it's not to suggest that they should be zero waste hard and fast, but that should be the goal. So when you're planning an event or when you're enabling small business to find a pathway to situating themselves in a banner, that these conversations are had. Will you require a washing machine to be able to facilitate washing your non-single service items so that you don't have plastics? Because ultimately the consumers pay for the plastic because it's in the food cost. We pay for it already. So it's an opportunity for us, if we can take that piece out, that possibly food and other resources become more accessible. I mean, obviously it's a small line item, but essentially we do already pay. We pay twice. We pay for the plastics, and then ultimately we pay for the degradation in terms of greenhouse gas and toxicity and everything else that plastic essentially disables or enables. I don't know if I answered your question.
Just on the food waste, and particularly the LRC, so that's something that I think a lot of us have been interested in, and we've discussed some of that. And I guess, Scott, I wonder if you have maybe just some, and I guess the point is not like no because X, Y, Z, but I think maybe just to highlight some of the blockages, and maybe if we kind of refresh some of that, maybe there's some thoughts on unblocking. Anyways, if you could.
Sure. So I'm going to zoom up to kind of a full-scale food scrap type program and describe the challenges or barriers to that, and then we can back down and think about a smaller scale or a pilot scale. In terms of offering a tipping fee for, let's say, grocery stores and restaurants that would want to collect and take food scrap to the landscape recycling center, we would need to do a couple of things. One, the facility may need to have additional capital equipment. The landscape recycling center does put revenues aside every year to maintain and purchase new capital equipment. So it's not outside the realm of possibility, but if they have to buy an additional piece, that can be a challenge. Two, they're going to have to change their operational protocols. Right now, by collecting landscape trimmings, the landscape trimmings get tipped. They don't necessarily have to be touched right away because nothing bad happens if you don't. It's leaves and sticks. If you bring in food scrap and it's tipped and you don't cover it, something bad does happen. It smells and it looks bad, And this is a retail facility. It needs to sell products, so it has to look good. Then the other operational challenge, and it may be a client challenge, is ensuring the cleanliness of the loads. So again, right now, accepting landscape trimmings, we get very, very clean loads. So when we sell a product, there's no glass and there's no plastic. Very rarely we find any of that in there. Some of that is the nature of the material we're accepting. Some of it is, the landscape recycling center has been operating for decades, and everybody knows the deal. They know not to put leaves in plastic bags. And so in that sense, the time thing could also work to improve the cleanliness of a food scrap load. The last barrier or challenge is if the landscape recycling center is going to accept more material, they have to sell more material. They can't continuously stockpile composted material. And so we need to develop more markets for our compost product. Also, I think not an insurmountable barrier. I think there are more markets out there to be had. But all those have to coincide. We have to get over those barriers all at once. That's for a larger scale, like a commercial or a curbside. And if we had a curbside system, it has its own challenges in terms of funding. That would have to be funded presumably by an increase in the use cycle tax. You can do a subscription service. Some cities do that, but if you don't have everyone in, then the marginal cost, the per person cost, goes up quite a bit, I presume. So those are some challenges. Now, if we scale that back and talk about pilot tests, we've done some of those. We had a load from the university some number of years ago, but what we ended up with was a lot of waxed paper cups, which, everything's compostable on a timeline, but those are not compostable in the timeline in the type of facility we operate. And so that was problematic. That ended up really just being contamination for our facility. We've also attempted, we attempt every single year to take a corn cob load from the Sweet Corn Festival. And every single year, not every single year, many years, that effort is confounded by contamination, by vendor mishaps. So, for instance, the sweet corn, those cans tend to be picked up 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the morning, or 6 a.m. the next day, and then some of those loads have ended up just going to the transfer station and didn't go to the LRC. Other loads, again, think about having volunteers clean up garbage at 1 a.m. Other corn cob loads have had bags of garbage piled on top of them at 1 a.m. after Sweet Corn Festival, and so we ended up with a contaminated load. So that's a problem we're continuing to develop, but that's a good pilot scale because they're mostly empty corn cobs, right? But they're still corn kernels, and it's still kind of food scrap. So it's kind of in that middle zone between landscape trimmings and food scrap. And also, it's not a 5-gallon bucket. It's a dumpster worth. So that's a big enough scale that staff at LRC can play with it and figure out what they need to do to get it composted without odor. So those are some of the barriers. I'm interested in first of all, we're going to continue working to bring corn cobs from LRC or from Sweet Corn Festival to LRC, but I'm interested in some additional pilots, whether they're one-offs, like a one-off per year, or whether they are a continuous sort of once a month or once a week thing. And so we're continuing that discussion with the Arbor Division, who runs the Landscape Recycling Center.
And who have you identified as possible providers of those food scraps?
I think one of the best opportunities would be grocery stores, for the particular reason that they do a lot of food prep that creates food waste that is pre-consumer, and it's managed and handled by staff. So it should be easier to keep a clean load than, say, a food scrap container available to customers, right, so who have to sort their tray into 3 different cans. Several years ago, we asked every grocery store in Urbana if they would be interested in that. We had one taker, and then that business sold, and then it sold again, and so that effort failed. It was at that time that we changed the Landscape Recycling Center's permit to allow up to 10% of their total volume as food scrap. That was a minor permit change. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I think we can do a lot of pilots and maybe even some reoccurring at that 10%. If we were to conceive of a citywide curbside food scrap, we'd have to get serious about how much mass that would generate, whether the LRC could throughput that, and that would probably, I presume, require a far more substantial permit change. It's all doable if we can get that far.
The thing about the one-offs is that you don't create that learning, when you talk about the learning curve, and we can get up that kind of learning curve, but that the one-offs, say for example annual or an alumni event at the university that they propose as zero waste, doesn't create the sort of curve for purposes of education and reinforcement. Because when it comes to recycling, it's like learning to drive. You don't just go on the road and know how to drive. There's a system so that you know what to do at a full waste stop, and it becomes inherent, right? You sort of over time, having done your driver's ed and been out on the road for a number of years, you learn the system, and everyone's obviously doing the same thing, so it works. And that's what recycling is. That's sort of a metaphor. And so it proposes of the pilots, I think it's great. I would sort of suggest diversifying the recipient chain just to be able to sort of test different models. So, for example, engaging the restaurants, and then also creating that coalition and having these broader discussions. So, for example, rather than just the Office of Sustainability, LRC, and the business, maybe include the Green Business Association to figure out kind of how they can create, how they can help, how they can troubleshoot for you, and how they can prepare businesses on your behalf to be able to meet the needs of the LRC. And I think you'd probably get more success with using some of the talents, some of the organizations that are already in town doing some of this work, for example, like the Green Business Association. So there are ways to do it. And I guess this issue of sort of circularity, and going back to that theme, is to use your coalition and your network of city organizations and individuals who are obviously passionate about these issues to kind of help solve the problems for you and kind of bring down some of the systems barriers that you're talking about, which obviously can quite easily turn people away, but they're just complicated. We can figure it out sort of with a bit of time and perseverance. I'm trying to think if I have any others. But I think one thing I did want to just sort of highlight again, and if there's something that you sort of can do in this regard, and this issue is, again, the city being a leader and being a role model. Really, I mean, everything that city does, if it can have a sort of a climate action bent purview, if that's a sort of a checklist, for example, for purposes of onboarding a new business, not that they have to meet the climate action goals, but sort of what can they succeed in terms of recycling? What are the touch points in the areas of sensitivity where they won't achieve? And you're taking these data points. What can they do? What can't they do? For purposes of refurbishing old building stock, there's going to be building waste. What are the data points? We're collecting data. For purposes of hosting an event, I guess for purposes of the Economic Development Group, when they host an event, there shouldn't be plastics and bottles. Because the Economic Development Group, for example, knows in the back of their minds that sustainability is key, and it's part of the Climate Action Plan, that this is preferable to have a zero-type waste event. Not 100%, but to have those conversations constantly, knowing that we sort of we act out our values. And I don't necessarily see that happening around the city consistently. I think we I think the city could do better. I think we could all do better, essentially. I think we have to do better. And the reason why I think we have to do better, because not only do you have the Climate Action Plan, but as of the 19th of February, you have Resolution 2018-02-005R, Urbana Climate Inheritance Resolution. You know, what does that mean? How are you going to act upon that? They set the bar high.
Thank you. I want to share just one thing. So when I go to the pharmacy, there is a hanging bag, and you, Amanda, you did remind me. So about sort of waste in pharmacies and plastic bags in pharmacies, for example. So there is a hanging plastic bag at the pharmacy that sorts everybody's prescriptions. In that hanging plastic bag is a sealed plastic bag that then contains a paper bag that contains a plastic bottle containing the prescription inside of it. And it is sort of hilarious when you think about the number of bags within bags and bottles within bottles, just so I can have a 30-day supply of something. It's a funny kind of thing to think about anyway. So I appreciated that example that you brought up. And then the second thing is, it is a little more action-oriented, at least on the Sweet Corn Festival. And I'm just wondering if there is a way for the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission to get involved with our networks, maybe students in our classes, to help ensure that all of the sort of roadblocks and other things that have gotten in the way of recycling corn cobs from the Corn Cob Festival, making sure that that runs more smoothly and that we can contribute a less contaminated waste stream for the LRC. So anyway.
You're welcome to volunteer.
Great. Okay, well, Amanda, thank you so much for presenting. I do want to just open it up to members of the public. If you have any questions about waste and recycling and circular economies, you're welcome to ask that now. If not, I will go ahead and move on to some of the other business that we have. Next on the agenda is a change to our bylaws. So during the meeting that the City of Urbana also adopted the Climate Inheritance Resolution, the Mayor of Urbana stated that she would be amenable to and would like for us to add a youth member to the Sustainability Advisory Council. And in order to help that happen, we did need to create a change in our bylaws that allows for that youth member. The change in the bylaws on that issue will state that from time to time, the mayor may appoint and the city council may approve the appointment of one resident of Urbana to the commission who has attained the age of 16 but who has not attained the age of 18. This member shall not have the authority to vote on any matter considered by the SAC, which may bind the SAC, the city, or any of its departments, but may vote on motions that make recommendations that are non-binding. Most of the recommendations that we make are non-binding, so that youth member will be able to vote on sort of the vast majority of the issues and recommendations that we make as an SAC. And I think just as one comment on this, I'm happy that the mayor saw that this would be an opportunity. This is an opportunity for the SAC to engage more youth voices in our commission and in the work that we do. So we have that as one change on the bylaws, and there are a couple of others as well. A second change has to do with the commission leadership consisting of a chairperson and a vice chairperson. We haven't previously had codified in our bylaws a vice chair, and so we added a section about having the mayor and members of the commission appoint a vice chairperson. And we also made an additional change to say that other duties of the SAC may review and make recommendations regarding the development of sustainability planning documents. So not just a sustainability plan, we're not sure, going forward that we will always have a sustainability plan or a climate action plan. So we're just using some more inclusive language there. I would entertain a motion to approve the bylaws as amended.
So moved.
Thank you, Morgan. Is there a second?
Do we have a chance for discussion?
Yes, after the motion.
Second.
Okay, Todd seconds. Okay, any discussion or questions about the changes to the bylaws?
So my question is about the age 16. So this is basically creating an additional age range of 2 years. And so I wonder, what is the logic behind 16 years old versus some other age, and any consideration to something younger like 14? So this is, I guess, basically high school age and maybe late middle school age. Some thoughts?
Scott, I'm going to let you answer that one.
The top level of 18 is because an 18-year-old can already be appointed to the commission.
Yes.
The bottom level of 16, I think there were some legal reasons, but I don't recall them anymore. It was a phone conversation, I think. I can ask legal about that again, but I don't recall.
Okay.
So, I understand where you're coming from. I think that the idea is to get a youth voice, which, there is definitely a difference between 16 and 18, but we can already get an 18-year-old's voice. This is to get the younger group. So, like a 14-year-old would have, I think, a different level of, I honestly think that they could potentially be a better contribution than a 16 or a 17-year-old, because a 16 or a 17-year-old is already getting into close to the age of graduation and maturity, old age, right? Like me. And so I understand that. But I would suggest that we proceed with the way it is now and ask Scott to find out if we could make it wider, make it a younger age, and then consider a different adjustment to the bylaws later if we really want to. Do you know what I mean? Instead of delaying the whole thing to wait, I'd rather see it approved with at least 16, because I don't think there's anything that stops us from adjusting it again, as far as I know.
Is there, is there a rush to, to have this passed and appoint somebody right away? I don't know. It's just always, it's always another thing. I don't want to, I'm not intending to delay it. I just, I wonder if we can do it once. Is there a particular rush to do this and be done with it now? Or, is it, if we get some opinion on why or why not, would a younger age be okay or not okay? And we can take it up next month.
As far as I know, there is no candidate waiting for us to change the bylaws to be appointed by the mayor. But I haven't promoted the opportunity through any communications in lieu of a change. So that would be that's the only, pressing concern, is just moving on with it, but there's no other reason.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing is if we start with, if there's an openness to considering a younger, like a lower threshold age, then just say 14, for example, then we presumably double the population of eligible people who could be that first representative. And if we go with 16 right now, and I maybe we end up doing that, but if we set it at a higher threshold, then we're restricting that available population when maybe we want to be open, to something broader. Those are my thoughts.
Well, my rush was about, especially from I hear about it from the college perspective. We take so long to do things, and anything that delays it might lead to people who are aware of it through the iMatter efforts to get the resolution passed being less interested. And I just think there's an opportunity we don't want to miss. So that's kind of where I was coming from could we move forward now? I didn't know anything about how we would pick that person. I know that people are self-nominated for here, but also encouraged by other commission members to join. And then appointed by the mayor, right? And so, if we waited to resolve this so that we could decide in April, then I am guessing it would take a little bit of time to actually get it into the books, right? If we approved it, would you have to do anything, or would it just be done right then?
It's done.
Okay, so then you could start promoting it in April? So that's,
Right,
that's
I guess
not bad.
my question is around whether or not we can begin recruiting to ask for people to get their applications in and to show interest before we have the bylaws in place.
You could, but you would either under-recruit by only saying 16 to 18, potentially, or over-recruit by saying 14 to 18, and then maybe we don't go 14.
Okay, and then the next thing that I would like to say is that there's no age restrictions on the people that can come and attend our meetings and make comments during the public comment period. We would certainly welcome more youth from the ages of 10 to 18.
3 to 14.
Children are welcome, and especially if there are middle school students that are, for example, working on a project, or they just researched something really cool and they wanted to share that with the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission. We would welcome that, and we would add them, if it's an appropriate topic, potentially add them to the agenda so that they could still gain valuable experience by experiencing a public meeting and speaking in that space. So I do hear, I think I understand where you're coming from about, the age 14 to 18 versus 16 to 18. But I'm just not sure that we're precluding participation in some way. And that if there was a 15-year-old or 14-year-old that was really interested in the work that we were doing, I would encourage them that as soon as they turn 16 to get their application in, because somebody is probably aging out of the youth position.
What is so let's say we pass this, the revisions as proposed. Does that mean that the bylaws are changed and that's what it is, or does it go to the council or mayor for approval?
This commission has created and approved its own bylaws.
Okay, so then if everyone agreed, then right now we could say 14 to 18 years old, And, I mean, so that would be one suggestion, is to modify it so that the lower limit would be 14 years old, and that, that would be my proposal.
So if, I'd be okay with that as long as before we actually go out seeking somebody, we get confirmation that we're allowed to have someone 14 or 15. Because Scott was concerned there was a legal restriction. But we could have the bylaws say 14 and just make sure that we're not breaking a rule. If it turns out they have to be 16, then it's a separate thing that's making it 16, not us.
While you're discussing, I observed that there's no term on the youth seat either, so you may want to include that in your motion, that it's maybe a 3-year term, which I think is what all of your term is. There's no length.
Okay, so the first thing that we would vote on then is not everything all as a whole right now, but we would vote on if you are making a motion to change the age from 16 to 14, so that a youth member could be anywhere from the age of 14 to 18, then we would vote on that. But if you motion for that.
I move to have a lower age limit, starting at 14 years old.
In a term of 3 years? Or do you want to do that
Let's
separately?
do the term separately.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor of lowering the age limit to 14, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That sounded, any nays? All right, that unanimously passed. All right, would you?
So can I ask a question about the terms?
Yes.
So at the end of a 3-year term, then the person has to go off for a year, is that correct? Or they can still just sort of re-up for another 3 years?
So, current membership can be reappointed by the mayor. The way this reads is that someone who has attained the age of 16 but not 18 can be appointed. Presuming, I mean, I construe that as if someone is appointed, someone could be appointed at 17 and a half, serve till they're 20 and a half, but not be reappointed as the youth seat. And if all the other seats are full, they're probably out for the time being.
Oh, I guess I know it wasn't written in there. I was assuming that they could only serve until they were 18 as the youth, because then they're no longer legalistically a youth.
That could lead to, I mean, we could write it that way, that's possible, but it may lead to more turnover than you want.
So then so if somebody came in at 17, we could have not a 20-year-old.
Which, considering the history of the membership, would still be pretty youthful.
It does, okay, so the language does say, for clarification, may approve the appointment of one resident of Urbana to the commission who has attained the age of 16, which we have changed to 14, but who has not attained the age of 18. I read that as that they would age out at 18, but perhaps that isn't clear.
I would recommend clarifying if that's what you want.
Okay, do we need to clarify that the term is until they reach their 18th birthday?
Yeah, I read that as being, they could be a member up until 18. They could become a member up to 18, but there was no maximum. So yeah, I would think you'd add that in, I guess.
I'd like to move to add a restriction on the term of the youth member, youth representative, youth seat, where their term ends on their 18th birthday. Or no later than, I should say, their 18th birthday. So if we could allow for 4 years of the same person. So my motion is that their term ends on their 18th birthday.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Any discussion or debate?
I guess one thought is, so Scott, brought up the consideration of turnover, and obviously that's a logistical and it's a challenging thing to deal with lots of people, but I think youth particularly. Life is in flux and things change, and their priorities necessarily need to be around, their education and family and things that are going on. And so one thing that I wonder about is, do we imagine a 1-year term that is subject to annual renewals? We could have a person who, keeps coming back and keeps coming back, but I wonder if we are aspiring for 3-year terms or 4-year terms, if that's just delusional and not actually understanding youth.
I think that's a good point, and actually it may be intimidating for someone who's interested but doesn't necessarily want to sign up for a 2, 3, 4-year commitment.
So maybe can I stack a motion on the motion?
Or can I withdraw my motion?
You're welcome to it.
I
Are
believe
you
you.
okay?
I withdraw my second.
Morgan, you withdraw your motion?
I withdraw that motion about expiring on their 18th birthday. Todd, feel free to replace it with something else.
Well, so I'm in agreement with the 18th birthday. So the motion that I would have is that we have a provision that states that the youth member shall have a term of 1 year, subject to or allowing for annual renewal, and that term of service will not extend beyond their 18th birthday.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Any discussion or debate? Right. All in favor of the motion to include a provision that the youth member shall have a term allowing, a 1-year term that allows for annual renewal, and that the term of service does not extend beyond their 18th birthday, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, that unanimously passes. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that is so far all of the amendments that we've had on the table. Okay. I believe that I just want to check with members of the public before we vote on changing the bylaws to see if there are any concerns with the changes that we've proposed so far. Okay. Not hearing any. All in favor? Wait, I'm sorry.
Do I need to update my motion to say including the amendments?
Well,
I
I think
moved
that the
to approve,
amendment
is that-
passed, so I don't know that you need to
Okay.
include. So you still have the motion to approve the bylaws. Okay, I don't remember in the minutes going backwards, and I'm sorry, Barb, if you wrote that down. It's okay if you
Yeah,
didn't. I think that
I
we
said
can.
to approve them as edited, and then we made amendments, so,
Yeah, maybe you've had amendments to the amendment, and now you need to approve the final.
We need to approve the final version.
so, can I just do a new motion? Scott says yes.
I think it's okay. Sorry, I did not keep better track.
It was confusing.
Okay.
So I move to approve the amendments as we have agreed upon here today.
I second.
Okay. All in favor of the amendments to the City of Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission bylaws as amended here today, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? All right, that also unanimously passes. Okay, next on our agenda tonight, and nearing the end, Scott, would you like to present the Environmental Sustainability Division Annual Report?
I would. Stacy, I observe it's 8:30, and would you like to give me a time frame or a time limit? I can do things as fast or as thorough as you like.
Can you present this in 10 minutes or less? But that does not include questions from the commission.
Fair enough. So in your packet is this draft report. And I'll go through it with you very quickly, and then maybe pause, and if there's some time, I will go through some slides of some additional information. So on the cover, we try to have an interesting photo. That's the new solar array behind the Arbor Shop at the closed landfill. So that's just a small single building solar array. That's our power purchase agreement. One of the first public sector power purchase agreements in the state that I've been able to find. On the second page here, not a lot of changes. We have our summary of our division, summary of the budget. You can see U-Cycle, which has its own specific taxes, about $750,000, and then the rest of the sustainability and environmental compliance or nuisance control budget is $250,000. And then progress charts for our two main planning documents. On the energy and climate page, as the other pages, we have some sidebars of additional information and some sort of feature story. In the main body, we have the community greenhouse gas emissions chart at the top. This is kind of the main story here. You will see that with our 2017 inventory, we are very near our 25% reduction by 2020 goal. That's the dotted line. After doing the inventory and then not believing it and redoing the numbers and rechecking the numbers 3 times, we're at a total from 2007 to 2017 of a 24% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's very welcome news. Whether this was a mild year for heating and cooling versus what will happen next year, I don't know. Hard to speculate. But certain things are driving and will continue to drive our inventory. One is the state's renewable portfolio standard, which ticks down the carbon intensity of the electric grid somewhere between 1.5%, depending on the year, every year. 2 is further electrification of cars, which when they're plugged into households in Urbana, get renewable energy credits. And then that's still the biggest impact on our greenhouse gas emissions is the purchase of renewable energy credits for all household energy consumption. The middle chart is our municipal electric aggregation savings, and then the bottom chart is not updated because we update that in the off years of the community inventory. That's the city facilities greenhouse gas emissions. Next page, again, additional information, feature story. Community water consumption, if you look over the last several years, it seems to have kind of leveled out. We are, compared to national averages, still very, very low in our per capita water consumption. So that's good. The middle chart shows that per capita. And then we've got city facilities. We had some pretty substantial water conservation efforts a few years ago, and maybe still declining, still conserving more water, but that's not a lot of change, so we maybe leveled off there. Next, waste and recycling. That chart is a little bit erratic in terms of the data. Something that I remind every year with respect to the portion that is landfilled, that is not real high quality data. We don't provide garbage service, and we don't own a transfer station or a landfill. So the way we get volumes for, or tonnages for landfill materials is through an ordinance that requires annual reporting from all the private garbage haulers. There's no prescription or obligation on the manner in which that data might be collected by the private garbage haulers. Middle chart is the use cycle recycling. That's much higher quality data. That's just 2 haulers which work on a contract with the city. So that's something more prescriptive and higher quality. So that kind of looks leveled out the last couple years after quite a few years of increases in recycling. And then the bottom chart is our battery recycling. Next page is nuisance. You may observe that the first chart is not updated yet. In 2017, our nuisance abatement program went from collecting data in Excel spreadsheet to being integrated into an inspection, a third-party inspection management system with the rest of the planning division and the building safety division, so that when inspections and other types of work are done upon a property, it's all recorded and attached to that property in a database. What that means is we're still working out how to generate reports from the new system and also combine the data from the Excel sheet to the new system without missing dates or duplicating dates. That was a little bit easier to do by nuisances by resolution, but we'll probably double check that data before we publish this. And then the bottom chart is adopt or ban of volunteer hours. And last page is awards and grants. I mentioned some cross-training we're doing with solar PV, with the planning division. Again, we're a Green Power Partnership community due to our purchase of renewable energy credits. A mention of city staff's participation in the UN Climate Conference, and then our really wonderful grant opportunity, sort of an incubator opportunity that the recycling coordinator is going through with the Community Foundation of Central Illinois. And I'll pause there and take any questions. What I have in terms of slides is this and more additional data that is sort of deeper dive than the summary that I like to put in this report. So we can do that, or we can hold it off to another month, but I'll pause there.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions from the commission?
I have, I think the first page should say your division name. And I just can't help calling you out for the single-sided printing. What happened?
That was so frustrating. Most of our printers are default double-sided, but the color printer is always resetting on on individual computers back to single-sided. So that's what happened.
I get it. I also have a question, and I think that I'm looking at page 3 where it has the community greenhouse gas emissions, and you're showing the 2 dotted lines on the chart that are based on our current city climate action plan. And then in the additional information, you show, you say, you know, in 2018, the City Council approved a resolution to establish a net carbon neutral goal to be achieved by 2040. And I'm wondering if it's possible to reflect that, you know, 100% reduction by 2040 in the chart area.
I will see if I can also make a dotted line that would be, you know, 100% reduction and squeeze it in the legend as well.
Yeah, I think it'd be in the legend.
And I meant this as a point of discussion. Certainly a 100% by 2040 essentially precludes an 80% by 2050. But there was nothing that erased the 25% by 2020. And so I'll put it to the commission, would it make sense to just replace the 80% by 2050 with the 100% by 2040?
It's kind of a question. I would support doing that.
One way to do that. I mean, obviously, if you put a dotted line on the 0, it's not the most helpful. I mean, it could be just like a simple linear trend, you know, going from, I don't know, different ways to represent it. But, you know, a dotted line on the 0, I'm not sure how useful that is.
I think the current
legend.
formatting, there's not a solid line on the bottom already.
Oh,
So I
see.
think you would see it,
Okay.
although there would be the issue of, is that just the bottom of the chart, or is that a line? Now, the fact that there would be that other dotted line still at 25% might train the eye that those are both, you know, parts of the chart and not just the border.
Mm-hmm.
We can try it.
Can you label the line instead of having it in the legend?
Maybe.
Then you don't have to worry about.
In the past, I just made a dotted line and I drug it to about the right place, and no one ever knew the difference. This time, I actually figured out, you know, how to put it in the formula, so it makes the dotted line itself.
Yeah.
Then
So
you
you're
have to
asking
worry
a lot,
about.
Andy, but
That's
I'll
right.
see what I can do.
Then you wouldn't have to worry about dotted lines
Yes.
to be the same color.
You could also just overlay an arrow. Should be able to draw one of those in PowerPoint. It's going to be okay. Okay.
Well, I've seen like a projected glide path, and so sometimes it's kind of handy to see, you know, nothing happens like, you know, the linear downward trend, but it can be helpful to see that kind of representation to get a sense of, well, what kind of, you know, what are we looking for, and whether it's linear or you're drawing non-linear things on there. Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, on the middle graph on page 3, the quarterly municipal electric aggregation savings, I really like seeing that, and I also wonder if there's, you know, at the moment it looks like we are positive over the, you know, over the time period. But, you know, as time goes on and we get more, you know, peaks and dips and all that kind of stuff, it might become less and less clear. And so I wonder if we have a cumulative representation on there, you know, if that if it allows maybe a little bit more long-term perspective on, how good of a deal is this, or maybe I don't know. I don't know if it's like cumulative from the zero or cumulative from some time period.
I certainly have that in an Excel spreadsheet. I was looking to see if I had it, and it appears I don't have it in this PowerPoint. So I have cumulative. One of the reasons I like this is cumulative just always, they both tell a story. Both
Yeah.
stories are true, but they have implications. The cumulative makes it look like all gravy all the time. Because the dips get washed out. So the
Yeah.
risk, from quarter to quarter isn't shown. This has a different problem, which is it washes out, well, what's the big picture? If I
Yeah.
had started with this and I stayed with this, am I good or bad?
Yeah.
There's a different one. Man, I thought I had it.
I wasn't, I was, I agree with that, and I guess I was, there's presenting both at the same time for the whole picture. Just another line on the graph, basically.
Oh, I hadn't considered that. Yeah, I have them all in this Excel. I have them all as separate
Yeah.
charts. Let me see about that.
What about having instead of a line graph, a histogram? Histogram, like a bar graph. That way you can kind of evaluate how much below or above the line it is.
I have a question about municipal aggregation. So I wasn't involved in the commission when that was being initiated here. But it was initiated by city, right? You were involved in that, right?
I was not here when it started.
Okay. But you were here when it was renewed.
Correct.
Okay. So it's my understanding that that's only for residential properties?
By state statute.
That was my question is, why can't we do that for commercial properties? State statute's the answer.
The county chamber of commerce works with a company that does competitive brokering of electric supply, and any business can sign up to get a price through that, and they can ask for renewable energy credits with their power.
On the greenhouse gas emissions, top graph, on page 3, and I know there's energy consumption behind those numbers, and anyways, we kind of go over this a little bit every time we get we get this refresh, but are you seeing any, so this trend that we're looking at, is it related to aggregation? Are we seeing downward trends? Are we seeing trends in energy consumption?
It's inconsistent. We'll see if I've got,
Which is what we had seen before.
yeah. Let's see what I've got here for you today. Here's the pie graph. Now this is after accounting for renewable energy credits in the residential, right? So commercial energy is big, transportation is big, residential is dramatically cut. Oh, there's cumulative. No, I did have it. I couldn't see it when it was small. So that, again, as I said, it just looks like, oh, it's all savings. Well, there are some down quarters. Oh, this was an interesting one. I just did this for the first time. And what I wondered was if the grid is more renewable every year, that's an increment less of renewable energy credits we purchase for our residents. Because when so let's say our residents use 100 kilowatt hours in 1 year, and the grid is, I think, like something like, let's say it's 12.5%. I can't remember what it is this year. We don't buy renewable energy credits for all 100 of those kilowatt hours. We buy for the balance after the 12.5. So next year it's 13. We buy less renewable energy credits. That's great. We're spending less ratepayer money on renewable energy credits, but still getting 100%, right? Because we're just buying up to 100. And so that's reflected here. You can see the line of best fit there. Let's see what else we got. Here is percent change by sector in greenhouse gases from the previous year, so 2015, by percent and also by metric ton. And so you'll see from 2015 to 2017, oh, and then also from baseline to baseline, or baseline to current year. So industrial energy had a 15% decline, but only 5,000 metric tons, compared to commercial energy, which had a 9% decline, but 20,000 metric tons.
Is there supposed to be a negative next to the change from baseline and the industrial?
The parentheses means negative metric tons. And then you also see it's not consistent from previous year and also from baseline. So
Is the baseline 2007?
correct.
Okay.
So residential from baseline to 2017 is large in both percentage and metric tons, but that's because we counted the RECs in 2013, and we had no RECs in 2007.
For commercial and industrial, the changes, do you have any idea if that's, investments in efficiency, or is it declines in economic activity, like we have fewer businesses or businesses doing less business, industry declining?
I can't say.
Okay.
Certainly some of it is, again, the renewable portfolio standard. Some of it may be equipment improvements. Whether it's business decline, I don't know.
One slight sidebar, can you go back to the previous with the pie chart on it? Yeah, that one. So you had in your staff report, you're talking about the VW settlement and the comment period. So a colleague of mine had started going through the, some of the documentation with that, and like you noted, a lot of it is devoted towards non-attainment areas. There is some non-trivial percentage, I think, that's allocated to our area, as in a few tens of percent or 10 or 20 or something like that. And so anyways, just looking at this yellow wedge on here for transportation sources, vehicle electrification and this VW settlement thing, that might be a thing for us to consider.
Yeah. Here's the difference with and without RECs. So the change, let's see.
So it's only in the residential.
Should be, but
Yeah.
it's, looks like maybe there's a formula mistaken
Oh, yeah.
in the percent. I'll have to double check that. So here's some consumption. so decline in gas from 2015. I have the 2016 data, but we didn't do an inventory then. So there is a decline in gas consumption. Very slight kilowatt hours. City facilities, no update there. I think that's in the report. That's in the report. That's in the report. That's in the report. Here's the chart, if you want to really look at the numbers.
Can you go back one slide, please,
Mhm.
just to the water slide? Maybe that was
Which one?
helpful. The city facility water consumption. Oh, nope, it was a different slide that says gallons and then in 1,000 gallons.
Yeah.
So community water consumption, if I'm looking at the commercial in 2006, am I understanding that that would be 1.5 billion gallons of water used?
Multiply the number times 1,000.
Yes, okay.
For water, are there cooling towers on the city facilities? We started working on cooling tower water conservation efforts.
I don't think there are. So you can see, you know, we had some years in the 40%, and now declined. That's a pretty big change, and yet nothing substantial has changed about our operations. So I'm attributing that to the imprecision of our waste data. This is an interesting one. This is, we went through a process to kind of ground truth who actually seems to have a U-cycle can and is using it. So in the past, we didn't have precise data of who had been distributed a U-cycle container. So now we track that. So when a can goes to this address, it's recorded a can went to that address and on the date. But we went in ground truth basically by, you know, which has, it's not perfect, but who put a can out on their recycling day. Now it could be someone was on vacation and they didn't, so the can didn't go out and we undercounted. But by doing that, we're able to dramatically increase the number of addresses in our database that had a recycled can. And if you have a can, we're calling you a participator. You're participating. And so part of our goal has been to increase participation. And so we've been making some improvements there, so I'm happy about that.
Is that at the household level?
Correct. We're presuming that, yeah, there's no way to account whether one apartment out of 35 takes their recyclables down to the dumpster or to the collection of multifamily U-cycle cans.
So the 77% participation in 2017 is based on single-family residential?
I think we also, I'll have to double check, I think we also include multifamily, and multifamily is just rounded up to 100 for multifamily.
Which could be, okay,
Yeah.
duplex, triplex, fourplex, et cetera.
Would you consider some data mining of that and, you know, areas that could be contacted to encourage recycling, or maybe have like a this is how recycling benefits you kind of event in a neighborhood that, like at a neighborhood block party or something, neighborhood group,
So-
association group?
When I say we have all these addresses where we've marked them as having a can, it also implies that we have the balance of the addresses that we have marked as not having a can. It's our intention to do a direct mail postcard to all of those addresses. We just haven't gotten it done yet.
Do you have it in GIS? Like in the map form?
Yeah, yes, and I think we've mapped it and have not really found a pattern.
I have another question about U-cycle, and I know I've asked it before, and I'm sorry, it just doesn't seem to stick in my head. Is the multifamily U-cycle program paid with a U-cycle tax. So all multifamily buildings ought to have, or can have this. They've already paid for it.
Correct.
Okay.
That's in the report. That's in the report. In the report. Oh, yeah, that's updated, of course. It shows 2018 because there's no. It's hard to get people out in the snow picking up garbage for Adopt Urbana. It won't look like that by the end of 2018. Okay.
All right. When are you planning on giving this presentation to City Council? And I'm asking that because I'm going to be mindful of time. It's almost 9 o'clock right now, and I wanted to make sure that the council members have the opportunity, if they would like to review this report further, to be able to submit comments to you about it. What would their deadline be?
So, if there were only minor suggestions tonight, I would just make them, and I would put it in council packet and in staff reports. Mention that it's there. Highlight one or two things for City Council. At your discretion, I could make the changes suggested and bring it back to SAC the next month, and thereafter put the report into council packet.
Okay. And are there any areas in particular that you would want members of the commission here to pay attention to? Do you have any questions from us? I know that we sort of represent a number of faculty and researchers and have all sorts of experience with data and things like that. Do you have any questions from us that would help you in delivering this report to the City Council?
The one decision that I had in mind for the commission was the community greenhouse gas chart and 80% versus the new 100% goal, and we answered that. If you come across something else or think of something else, you do not need to wait to the next meeting. Feel free to email me.
Okay. Are there any other final questions from the commission on the annual report? Are there any questions from the public that you would like to ask about the annual report? Amanda.
One question.
Oh, I do need you to come up and use the microphone.
Quick question with regard, Amanda Soskin, Urbana. Quick question in regard to the recycling participation. It might not be this particular data piece for purposes of the council, but do you also keep a record of there's participation and then there's the quality of the recycling? So obviously it goes to the center, and then obviously some proportion of that number is recyclable, and then some proportion is either contaminated, or for one reason or another it's damp, it's wet, it can't be used. So what is the actual effectiveness and the quality of the recycling?
The contract has a diversion goal, and I can't, off the top of my head, I think it's 90% or something like that. And that's reported by the hauler, and the haulers, I think the haulers here have their own material recovery facility, so that's something they report to us, and they've always hit that goal.
So of the 77% participation, 90% of that is actually recyclable and finds another home.
Sure, as well is being bundled, sorted, bundled, sold off, and then, that 5-10% is, stuff that falls through the cracks or is in fact not recyclable, and ends up being sorted into a landfill stream.
Is it always so consistent? It seems too good to be true.
Well, you collect from a lot of different places. The extremes balance themselves out, I suppose. On a one-day route, a single container completely full of contamination gets mixed in and becomes not a lot in the total. I don't think that actually happens. We don't have it because we have the staff who work for the haulers, when they go to tip, they peek, and if it looks like there's contamination, they won't tip the can and they'll leave it at the curb. And we have a tag system where they'll actually put I don't know what the color is, but put a tag on the can so that the homeowner knows when they come home in the evening that they weren't missed, but in fact they had a problem with what was in their can.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Are there any announcements this evening?
I have an announcement. The U of I Sustainability Department's active transportation coordinator is collaborating with the Student Sustainability Committee to provide a free screening of the documentary called Free to Ride tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the Transportation Building. That's the name of the building. It's on Matthews Avenue in Urbana, room 112. It's all over Facebook. And Free to Ride is a documentary looking at a situation where a community rejected public transit and was brought to court under the Civil Rights Act and were required to address it because of the intersection between transit and social equity. So it should be a very interesting film, and it's free, and it'll be a fun group of people. 4 o'clock, room 112, Transportation, tomorrow.
Are there any more announcements? All right, with no further business before the commission, is there a motion to adjourn?
I put a motion to adjourn.
Oh, is there a second?
A second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning? Aye. All right, everybody, have a good night.